everybody! So this week we are going to be talking about context clues. So context clues are a really important tool to have in our tool bag as a reader to help us read faster and to help us just be more proficient in what we're reading. So before we get going, make sure you have a pen or a pencil and some paper or your notebook so we can take some good notes. Alright, let's get started. So we are going to be talking about context clues, and there are 5 vocabulary words that we're going to want to remember from today's lesson. Our first 2 that we want to talk about are synonym and antonym, and then the last 3, they go together. You have root word, prefix, and suffix. So these are the 5 vocabulary words that we're going to focus on today, and we're going to talk about what they mean in a minute. So what we want to talk about first is what actually is a context clue. So a context clue is a hint that the author gives to the reader about words that we don't know. As a reader, we know that when we come across words that we don't know, there are a couple of things we can do. Sometimes we stop and we try to figure out what that word means. Sometimes we just keep going and we say, okay, I'll come back to it. And sometimes we kind of freeze and we don't do anything. What we want to do with context clues is give ourselves some tools to be able to figure out what those words mean without having to look them up. So what we want to remember is that as a context clue, really these are just hints. That's the thing we want to remember. They are the hints that an author leaves you. An author knows when they're using a word that you may not have heard before, so what they do is they try to give you clues to figure out what that unknown word means. So imagine something like science. Science has a lot of specific vocabulary that applies only to science. And the author knows this, so they're going to give you hints and context clues to help you figure out what those unknown words mean to you. When we use context clues, they are going to help us to better understand what the sentence or paragraph really means. So our goals today are to use context clues to understand new words, to use context clues to help us build our vocabulary, and to use context clues to help us read anything like a pro. So how do we do that? The first way that we do that is by using context clues in their 4 different categories. So the categories that we talk about are word clues, which includes synonyms, antonyms, homophones, and homonyms. We'll not be talking about homonyms and homophones today, but if you do want some practice with them, we'll get to that a little later. So we've got word clues as a form. We've got word parts as a form, like prefixes, suffixes, and root word clues. And then the last 2 kind of go together, example clues and experience clues. So we'll talk about those last. So first up, what we're going to talk about are the word clues. So word clues, like we said, have those 4 types: synonyms, antonyms, homophones, and homonyms. And we're going to be talking about the synonyms and antonyms first. So let's start off by talking about the synonyms. So synonyms are words that mean exactly or nearly the same as another word. So the way that I remember this is that the S in synonyms is my clue. So synonym means the same. So if I remember that there is an S in synonym, I can remember that there is also an S in same. What I really want to reinforce here is that these can mean exactly or nearly the same. So take these sheep, for example. They're not exactly the same, but we know that they are nearly the same thing. That's how synonyms usually work. So a good example of synonyms is that word beautiful. We know that there are lots of ways to say that someone is beautiful. You can be attractive or pretty or lovely or stunning or cute or sexy. All of these mean the same thing, that you are physically attractive. But we want to think about when you would use those words. I wouldn't tell a child that they look stunning, right? Because that's just not a word we would use for children. Instead, I would use something like cute. So even though these words have nearly the same meaning, we don't use them in the same context, and that's what's important here. So I put up another couple of examples here, different ways to say happy, different ways to say mean, and different ways to say weak. They're all synonyms for one another in their row. So these are good practice for us. So how do we use these and why do we use them to help us with context clues? So synonyms are helpful because they can be hints for other phrases in the sentence. What I mean by this is if we take a look at our first sentence here, the dates are listed in chronological order. They start at the beginning and end with the last event. I need to know what chronological means. So when I read this first sentence, something is listed in chronological order. I may not know what chronological means, but I know that order is all about how things are situated, right? I can put things in order from how much I like them to how little I like them. I can put things in order alphabetically. I can put things in order numerically. So there are a lot of orders that I can put in. So if I read the second sentence, I see they start at the beginning and end with the last event. That sounds like a kind of order. So I'm seeing that order is kind of a synonym here with beginning and ending with the last event. So I think that chronological might have to do with the order that events are put in. And that's actually exactly what it is. When we see chrono, this beginning part of the word, chrono means anything to do with time, and logical means anything to do with order. So chronological literally means the order of time from the beginning to the end. So it matches something that we see a little bit later in the second sentence here. So let's do the same thing with the second sentence. It was an idyllic day, sunny, warm, and perfect for a walk in the park. Then I need to figure out what idyllic means. So I'm going to look for other clues in the sentence. Well, I see that the day is sunny, warm, and perfect for a walk in the park. I think these might be good examples for what idyllic means. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to replace the word idyllic with perfect and see if they're synonyms for one another. So if I reread that sentence, it was a perfect day, sunny and warm and perfect for a walk in the park. Yeah, that sounds good. I could also use the word beautiful here. Let's see if that fits. It was a beautiful day, sunny, warm, and perfect for a walk in the park. That fits too. So when I'm replacing this word with a synonym, it helps me to see that I now know that idyllic means beautiful or perfect. That's a good way to figure out that word meaning. So what we want to remember is that synonyms mean the same thing, and we can replace them in sentences to find word meaning. Now, if synonyms mean the same thing, antonyms, on the other hand, mean exactly the opposite. So what we want to think to ourselves is that we all know what opposites are. We know that. That's a skill we all have. Instead of saying what is the opposite of something, though, I'm going to challenge you to start saying what is the antonym of something. So on the screen here, I've got a list of words that are pretty common opposites that we could find. But instead of saying opposites, we're going to say antonym. So for example, I would say the antonym of old is new. The antonym of late is early. The antonym of big is soft. Oh, excuse me, sorry, I was reading the same thing. Sorry, guys. The antonym of big is little. That makes more sense. The antonym of soft is hard. The antonym of broken is fixed. And the antonym of full is empty. So all I'm doing is instead of saying opposite, I'm saying antonym. So synonym is the same. Antonym is the opposite. What we're doing is we're using these similarly to find word meaning, though. So what I want to first start off by saying with antonyms is that we have certain signal words or clue words that help us find out that something is the opposite of something else, something that is not the same. So these are words like the word not and the word but. Not and but are both really good signal words to show us that something is different from one another. So when I look at my first sentence here, Marty is gregarious, not like his brother who is quiet and shy. I need to figure out what gregarious means. So when I read this sentence, the first thing that stands out to me is this word not. I know that when I read not, it means that whatever follows is different than whatever came before it. So since I'm dealing with two people, Marty and his brother, I know that they are not alike. I know that his brother is quiet and shy. So what would be the opposite of being quiet and shy? What antonyms could I come up with? I would think of words like loud, outgoing, personable, things like that. So I'm going to say that gregarious means that he is a loud and outgoing person. Let's see if that makes sense in the sentence. Marty is loud and outgoing, not like his brother who's quiet and shy. Yeah, that makes some good sense in the sentence. I understand that. So what we're doing is we are using the clues inside of the sentence to find meaning for our antonym word. Let's do the same thing in our second sentence. I'm willing to hike in the mountains, but he is reluctant because it's so cold walking up and down the trails. The first thing I notice is this word but. So but is another one of those words that tells me an opposite is present. So if this person is reluctant, then the other person has to be doing the opposite of that. So let's see what the other person is doing. I see that the first person is willing to hike up the mountains. That means they kind of want to go. So the opposite of wanting to go is not wanting to do it. So I might be able to say that reluctant going. So we've talked about synonyms and antonyms. The next thing that we want to talk about are word clues, which include prefixes and suffixes and root words. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are root words. Root words, when I hear that, the first thing that I think of is a root, and that makes me think of plants. I know that plants can't grow if they don't have good roots, so the roots are the base of all good plants, and the same thing applies to our words. Root words are the base of all words. We want to remember that all big words are made up of small words. So the root word is the base word that we build on top of to create bigger words. So for example, let's look at this word abnormal. Well, I know that I would probably hear this word at maybe a doctor's office. I wouldn't want to hear it because for us, it feels kind of like a negative word. If we break it down to say that normal is the root word. It is the main part of the word that you can build off of that has meaning. And we know that normal just means usual. It's the usual thing that I do. When I add ab to the front of it, though, ab means away. So it completely changes that word. Now what we see is that abnormal literally means away from normal. We just know it to mean not normal. But what I want you to see is that when we add parts to different pieces of the word, when we add them together, they create brand new word meanings. So a lot of the words that we use every day are Greek or Latin roots, and that's just kind of a cool tidbit to know. The second part of our word pieces are prefixes. Now prefixes tell you where they go in their name. That word pre, when we see it at the beginning of a word, it means before. So let's think about some other words that we know with pre. I know words like preschool, pre-test, preheat. All of those words tell me that I do something before. Preschool, you go to school before you're ready to start school. Preheat, you heat the oven before you're ready to cook. And then pre-test, you do it before you attend school. So a prefix is just the part of the word that comes before a root word, and they change the way that we talk about a word. So this is a list of common prefixes that we see. I'm going to attach a link to this list, that way you have it for future use. So prefixes always come before the word. Their opposites are suffixes. Suffixes are words that come at the end of the word. Now, what I want you to notice is that a lot of these suffixes are adjective, adverb, or verb endings. And what I mean by this is that they're endings that we would normally see for action, for describing action, like how you do or when you do an action, or describing a person and their qualities. So let's take a look at this word walked for a second. I know that walk is an action that I do. And I know that when I add ed to the end of it, it tells me that I did it in the past. So adding these tiny endings, just like prefixes, changes the way you say the word and what it means. So this is, again, a good list of suffixes for us to look at and start practicing with. And I will also have this as an attachment for you as well. So we've got root prefixes and suffixes. We've talked about synonyms and antonyms. And the last part of our lesson today, we're going to talk about the 5 steps to find word meaning. And this is actually the most important part of the lesson. So what I want to give you is 5 tools that you can use to help you figure out what your new vocabulary words mean. I want you to practice using these 5 steps to find out new words before you look them up. The goal is that we should be able to figure out what words mean on our own and only have to look them up when we get really stuck. So the 5 steps that we're going to practice with are using prior knowledge, reading around the word, looking at text features, thinking about word parts, and picking a substitute. So how do we use these? Our first step is prior knowledge. We want to give ourselves credit for all the things that you know. So imagine if you are a mechanic, you have a really great vocabulary that's all about cars and fixing cars. If you are a doctor or a nurse, you have a very specific vocabulary all about medicine and healing. I am a teacher, so I have a great vocabulary for teaching and communicating. You have that same kind of background. Give yourself credit for all the things that you already know. As a reader, when you approach something new, what we want to do is ask ourselves, what do we already know about this subject? You need to give your brain a place to store information. And by connecting new information to information you already know, you're more likely to remember it. So before you start reading something new, you want to think, what do I already know about this topic? What are some things that I might remember? And even if it seems silly, like the facts that you know don't seem very relevant, that's okay. We still want to say, what do I already know? The second thing we want to ask is, what words might I see in this reading that I'm familiar with? So again, we all have a very specific vocabulary, so you may have words that fit into this lesson or into the reading that you're doing. And you want to say, how can I use those words to figure out words I don't know? So using what you know to figure out what you don't know is what we want to do with our prior knowledge. So that's step number 1, using that prior knowledge. Step number 2 is reading around the word. And this is actually the most important step that we're going to practice. Reading around the word means that you do not stop when you come to a new word. Think back to that sentence we read about Marty. Marty is gregarious, not like his brother who is quiet and shy. If we had stopped reading after the word gregarious, we would have never gotten to those clues that tell us that Marty is not like his brother. So what's really important is that you need to finish reading the sentence and then ask, are there any clues about what this word may mean? For most of our questions in our lesson and our assignment today, the answer is yes. You're going to see a clue about what that word meaning is. If you do not see any clues, then continue reading. Read the sentences that are around the word, and then try practicing reading the entire paragraph. Sometimes we need more than just the sentence to gain an understanding of what that word means. And what I really want to emphasize here with the second part is that there are word clues that will help give you hints to what these new words might mean. And I'm going to add one more in. Words like, as, for example, meaning this means an or, should be like flashing lights for us. When we see them, those are our signals that what we're seeing is a clue or a hint about the definition of our unknown word. So always keep an eye out for these. Look for the hints that you're given. So step number 1 is using our prior knowledge. Step number 2 is reading around the word. And that brings us to step number 3, which is looking at text features. So text features are the extra things that you're given. These are things like pictures, headlines, graphics, maps, charts, captions, titles, anything in bold. If you're given a dictionary, use them. Anything that the author gives you that is extra is a good place to hunt for word meaning. We may not be able to use it all the time, but it's always good to read completely. Look for clues that may be in places other than just the paragraph or the sentence itself. So we've got step number 1, use our prior knowledge. Step number 2, which was reading around the word, and step number 3, which is looking at text features. So step number 4, thinking about word parts. So the reason that this is a little farther down the list is because it takes a lot more time. What we mean when we say thinking about word parts, we mean break down the word, break it apart. Look for prefixes, look for suffixes, and look for root words that you might know. Try pulling apart those pieces and seeing what other words do I know that share this in common. When we break apart a word, we may be looking for things that we already know. We may be looking for pieces that may belong in other words that we have. And we want to say, how can I take what I know about those other pieces to bring meaning to my new word? So that's why this is a little bit farther down on the steps list, is because it takes a lot more time. And that's okay. The more comfortable you get with remembering what a prefix and a suffix are and which types of words are prefixes and suffixes, you will have a much better understanding of how to do this appropriately. So I recommend practicing with this skill. So we have step number 1, using our prior knowledge. Step number 2, reading around the word. Step number 3, looking at text features. And step number 4, thinking about word parts. And that brings us to our last step, choosing a substitute. So we did this with that word idyllic. It was an idyllic day, sunny, warm, and perfect for a walk in the park. And we tried to substitute the words perfect and beautiful in for the word idyllic. And what we found is that the sentence still made sense. That's what we do when we are choosing a substitute. We are removing our unknown word and putting in a word that we do know to try to see if we have understanding for that sentence. So what you're using is a synonym and antonym to replace the word that you're not sure about. The word that you don't know might be a synonym to a word that you do know. So when you replace that word, we want to say, does this make sense? Does the sentence still sound good? So we've got our 5 steps for figuring out what words mean. And I'm going to go back to that slide really quickly so that we can end on that note. Our 5 steps for words meaning. So these are the 5 steps that I want you to be practicing as you are reading. I'm going to challenge you to start incorporating these into your reading practices because it's really important to be able to figure out what words mean as you're reading. I know that there are always easy ways to find out word meaning, right? We can always ask somebody, we can always look them up, we can always Google it and use a dictionary. But that's not going to help us remember those words. That's practicing a skill of finding information. Our goal has to be learning new words so that when we read them again, we remember what those words actually mean. That's why we want to practice these 5 steps. Now, after you have done all 5 of these steps, and if you're still not 100% sure about what those words mean, yeah, go ahead and look them up. That's perfectly fine. But what I want you to do is really try practicing these tips for figuring out what those unknown words mean. All right, everybody. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next week. Bye.